So a little bit about E4 Carolinas. We're the trade association for Carolina energy companies and organizations. We were created in 2012. I showed up in 2014. I've been here a little more than 7 years. Our staff has grown to 9. It's going to grow a little bit more in early 2022 as we take on another new program. We'll be up to about 11 then. We're sprinkled over all of North Carolina and South Carolina. We have staff that's over kind of in the coastal area of South Carolina, in Columbia, a few staff people in the Charlotte area, one in the Triangle area, one up in the Triad area, and we even have a staff person who works remotely from the Dallas metro area. So not that we provide service there, but we use that staff person there. We produce service and content in 5 areas. You can see them there. We also have a number of projects that are grant funded that we have in process in various stages. We have one project, 3-year project, that focuses on alternative fuels and vehicles. Another one that was just funded about 3 months ago, where for 3 years we're going to be working to develop an advanced nuclear technologies plan. We have a small grant that runs for less than a year to develop a regional plan for hydrogen. And then we were just funded, effective October 1, for a project by the U.S. Department of Energy to create an energy hardware accelerator. And that may be of interest to a lot of you because it's going to be kind of heavy energy tech oriented. And we're in partnership with the Jules Accelerator based in Charlotte. And that is a 2-state project, North Carolina, South Carolina. So that's kind of us. Let me move on. And again, let me thank Bradley, the sponsor of this series. They provide resources and funds that allow us to produce this at no charge. And we've been able to produce it virtually since the pandemic without interruption. Our sponsor with Bradley is Monica Dozier. And Monica, why don't you come on screen and share with us a little bit about Bradley and its energy practice, if you would.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, David and Jess and everyone else. If you can hear me, my name is Monica Dozier, and I am a partner in Bradley's Charlotte office. We are a primarily Southeastern-based law firm with a strong energy and technology practice. I am co-chair of our solar energy practice, and I do everything, all things solar coasters, I like to say. My work focuses on renewable energy and technologies of all types, including, of course, emerging technologies and cybersecurity issues, which I'm very, very involved in at this point. So very happy to welcome Nick Matchett and Trilliant to our energy technology series today, and appreciate E4 doing all of the legwork to make this happen. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and introduce Nick and turn the floor over to him. Nick Matchett, as I mentioned, is the Managing Director for Americas of Trilliant. As Managing Director for Americas, Nick is responsible for expanding the industry and leadership in the Americas region. With over 9 years of experience at Trilliant, holding positions in the EMEA region, Nick brings more than 20 years experience with technology and high growth businesses worldwide, including fixed and wireless communications in Europe, North America, and South America. Nick received a Master's of Engineering degree from Sheffield University and has studied at the Cranfield School of Management. Nick, with that, I will turn it over to you, and we look forward to learning more today.
Thanks for the introduction, Monica, and also thanks to Bradley for sponsoring the event today and the invitation to come and talk with you. So I think we've got nearly an hour and a half for this session, including questions at the end. I'm going to do the 60-minute version, about 35-40 minutes of talking, and not the feature-length movie. So I think we're going to have a little time left at the end, and so perhaps we can take David up on his offer of cold drinks and rock music to fill in the gap at the end. I'm going to try and share my screen here, so hopefully that comes up. Okay, I'll just check. If you could just nod, David, if you can see that. Perfect.
Nick, you're a genius.
Well, thank you. So look, yeah, very happy to sort of, yeah, we'll get through the topics today, but if there's anything that anyone wants to dig into in more detail, happy to do that offline. There's a QR code in the top corner there at the start and also at the end with my contact details. I'm very happy to connect separately and go through any of these topics that you'd like in more detail. So I want to start with some of the context and key drivers and themes that we're seeing in the energy and the utility industry today across the globe. The challenges that those are creating and how we see that evolving. And primarily the presentation I'm doing today, we're really talking about the electric industry. But as I could sort of think about it and I look across into water and gas, I really see the same trends and principles being able to apply it into these other utilities as well. So we're seeing a transition for utilities in many places around the globe. We think it's already started, and I want to talk about how the technology plays a critical role in enabling and making this transition successful. And I want to talk about how Trilliant are participating in doing that by providing connectivity to those utilities, allowing them to connect in equipment, plant, and assets across a broad range of applications, and how they're able to connect that in a secure way and allows data to be shared with trusted and untrusted sources. So I'm just going to give very quickly, and I'm going to come back to Trilliant towards the end of the presentation. But, who are Trilliant for any of you are not familiar with us? We're a global technology provider. Our focus is really around smart grid with utilities and Internet of Things. My region is the Americas, and we've got about 25 customers in the US, which includes IOUs, munis, and co-ops. But a big area of my business at the moment has been developed in Central and South America. So, but beyond the US, which in itself is a sizable territory with a lot going on, we're active in Peru, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and a number of the Caribbean islands as well. So a real spectrum of different types of utilities solving different types of problem, different funding models, different regulators. We're a market leader in the communications and software for connected infrastructure and assets. Primarily, we work with utilities, but also that extends to cities and country infrastructure as well. And I think what we see is some of the principles we were developing 10 years ago around how we think communication should work for connected devices. And we've been championing for 10 years and now beginning to be backed by other companies as this sort of a greater proliferation of Internet of Things devices. Of course, 10 years ago, it wasn't called Internet of Things. We've been innovating for around 30 years with our customers. We're headquartered in Raleigh. We've been there for about 4 years now. And we're a privately owned business. Across the globe, we've got about 80 customers in more than 25 countries. And generally, those are customers who tend to be large and long-term relationship, 10, 15 years, that type of duration. And we've got 35 million connected devices around the world, which service about 500 million customers. So 35 million is a pretty good size across the deployment. I guess it's equivalent to connecting everyone in Canada as an example, but it's certainly a substantial achievement. A big part of our value proposition, what sits behind our business, is providing open and interoperable networks that different manufacturers can connect their equipment to. We're independent of equipment manufacturers. We don't make distribution automation equipment. We don't make metering equipment. Another principle is it's a multi-application platform to put many different types of application on a single communication network. And I'm going to come back and talk about that later. But those two principles brought together are big drivers to reducing complexity and cost of communications in utility companies. So I'm going to talk a little about the transition that we're seeing, and I think there's a global trend for utilities of all sizes with objectives to deliver sustainable business plans that orientate around common themes of decarbonisation, decentralisation, digitalisation. And just one example, we've just acquired a new customer in El Salvador. It's AES in El Salvador, and those are three key principles that they're trying to drive into their deployment there. And to sort of build on those principles, that they're looking to support more distributed energy sources and increase the level of technology across the operational infrastructure to get better insights and deliver effectively what's a safer, more reliable, and a lower cost operation, as well as using, particularly on the digitalization side, an opportunity to create new products and services that are more customer centric. The common theme, of course, across the 3Ds here is really the technology, digitalization in particular, but really to get the full value of decentralizing the resources and moving to sort of lower carbon technologies. The technology plays a vital role in enabling those and maximizing the benefits. And again, we're going to come back and talk about that in a moment. And a little bit on my background. I was in power engineering. I spent the first 10 years of my career working in a utility in the UK, and I did a degree in power engineering, and it was always a very linear system. You produce power in one place and it fell out in another place of the grid. And just what I see working with our customers, more so in the Caribbean and Latin America, but we obviously see it in the US as well. This theme of decentralized, embedded sources of energy is just getting bigger and bigger, and the whole model around how the grid system operates changes, and technology can provide a great advantage to allow you to integrate those sources, but also run the network more efficiently as well. And from the conversations we sort of have with the different utilities, we sort of ask them what keeps them awake at night, what are the key issues that they're seeing. And I think it comes down to sort of 3 or 4 main topics as we roll these all up. One is recognizing there's definitely a change of business model coming for utilities. How do they preserve the integrity and the security of their supply? And certainly cyber attacks is a theme that comes up again and again. If they're going to make changes and they're going to do things differently, how do they make sure that those assets are secure from cyber attacks? They come to investment, and how much do they invest in the smart grid now? How much do they invest in the future? How do they balance that, and how do they do the justification behind it? And then the last piece is, as we move to this sort of new smart grid centric model, how do they better embrace things like distributed energy, demand reduction, different models around transactive energy? So those are the sort of key themes that we're hearing. But you step back for a moment and think about just in general, most utilities have historically had strategies that are centered around regulatory policy, capital investment, and customer service. And more typically, these end up being executed around sort of accommodating the regulator rather than a market intention. And I think that leads to some behaviors that utilities act cautiously rather than embracing an unfamiliar risk. And with the changes we're seeing, the structure of the power and gas markets, there's a need to accelerate the pace of change. Some of those conservative approaches towards the commercials for utilities just won't stay viable. And utilities have got to move to a model where they're sort of more intentional in the market, aggressive and consequential, even in the face of uncertainty, particularly as there are other parties are trying to move into either adjacent or identical space. Let me move to my next slide and one of the I was sort of doing a little bit of research around investment in the US, and it was kind of interesting to see. They were talking about the average age of power lines and transformers is 28 years in the US. The average age of generation assets is 30 years. And the cost of replacing these assets in the US was about just between sort of $4 and $5 trillion. And when you sort of put that in perspective against the current rates of inflation, you're talking sort of a 200-year investment plan behind replacing these types of assets. So there's definitely a challenge of, as we move to these new models, what can you do with the existing assets? How can you modernize them through digitalization? There's some of the key trends that we're seeing that is underpinning this transition in the sort of the energy market and the utility space is customers are looking for greater choice, more customer-centric approaches. We're also seeing a theme where there are certainly consumers who would prefer to buy energy from companies who offer sustainable options, and the UK is probably a good example of that. There are companies there that offer 100% sustainable energy, and consumers are changing to them as a preference. There's a theme of decarbonisation. There's a theme of decarbonisation where that's really being driven by regulation and policy, and utilities are really trying to work out how they embrace that and move it forward. A shift in power generating sources, more integrated energy. And that sort of moves to a theme of regionalization of energy as well, particularly around cities where other providers can move in. Tesla might be a great example of that, where they're bringing almost sort of mini utilities. And we saw Tesla announcing their registration as a utility in Texas just in the last, I'm going to say, 4 or 6 weeks. How can they accelerate these technologies, leveraging things around big data, more automation around distribution automation, and artificial intelligence and machine learning as well? And how do they package these up? These technologies are available, but it's a question of how they can use them in the most effective ways. And then, I guess all utilities are looking for, how do they increase value to the shareholders or to their members? And so there's a theme of companies moving together, new parties moving into the traditional utility space, and a theme of sort of increased merger and acquisition. And that includes where utilities are looking at embracing some of these digital technologies, actually acquiring the companies themselves and bring them into their business. So I talked before a little bit about the three Ds, and what we're really talking about here is moving towards energy which is cleaner, more distributed through the territory, not as centralized, bringing intelligence to these assets, and also embracing the theme of sort of more mobile energy, how energy sources can be moved around within a transmission or distribution area. So just a couple of the points I sort of want to talk through on here is on clean energy, the things that we're seeing: renewables, a smarter grid, lower carbon cities, and alternative fuels. There's a global economy moving towards decarbonization. I think I saw the statistics or some of the announcements for the US, and these things always change. It's difficult to work out what's solid today and what will change. But I think they were talking about carbon neutral by 2050, a 50% reduction, I think by 2030 in carbon emissions. And there's always a bit of interpretation on these, but these are pretty big themes that are going to drive change. And distributed energy assets, we're certainly seeing a centralized asset model that's in decline. A trend of democratizing energy, sources like solar, wind, battery, EVs, backup generation being used to fill in gaps as well. A little bit of the, I'm going to call it the bring your own device model, how people have been able to bring their own sources of energy. And then, how do you integrate these into the grid system in a way that makes them fully effective and useful? And that brings technology on distributed computing, data and analytics on how you integrate those in with the way that the utility operate. And we're going to do a survey at the start, but I'm just going to talk about some sort of personal experience here. And where I live in California, and if you look at my neighbors, both my neighbors on either side have got electric vehicles. Both have got solar panels, and their electricity bill is about $100 a year in total. So through the process of having those solar panels, they've almost got little or no draw on energy from the utility company, which I think is just a huge change in the way that these businesses will need to operate. On the mobile side, your energy production and consumption is increasingly mobile, both from a gas side, from a generation side, talking about using electric vehicles, particularly commercial electric vehicles, as sources of energy in non-peak hours. And then, the last piece is the intelligence, and what does this look like in this sort of path to transition of having clean and distributed energy? More connected devices underpinned by the communications, and that includes assets, plant and equipment. More automation, more information about those assets, how they're behaving, what they're doing, what they're capable of. A ubiquitous communication platform that lets you connect almost any device, any of the utility devices in, but also connecting equipment from other people in a way that's safe and secure, and harvesting information from that, or remotely controlling it to again improve the sort of overall operation cohesiveness of the grid. Being able to optimize that through machine learning, and then using artificial intelligence to have this sort of transactional automation. When you pull this sort of clean energy, distributed sources of energy, and this intelligence together, we're moving towards a model. We've really seen the first stages of this being implemented, and I'm going to call it the neural smart grid, or the energy cloud. And whether it's electricity or gas or water, these transmission and distribution networks are really among the world's sort of largest and most complex systems. And what we're talking about here by adding the intelligence is to increase the brain power of these systems. How do you transform that legacy infrastructure into a platform that's going to support this automation, energy cloud, and the neural grid? And today we're looking at a lot of sort of legacy mechanical sort of transmission and distribution assets with some pockets of automation. In some cases it's small, in some cases it's pretty advanced. It really depends on the utility. Quite commonly we see, and I can think of one example now of a utility, investor-owned utility that we work with. They have 12 different communication networks within their business for their operational assets. They've got different communication networks for different manufacturer equipment. Generally, some networks cover some areas, some cover other areas, but there's some overlap as well. There's also inefficiency, but to run that on a sort of day-to-day basis is complex. There's a lot of cost, and you've got a lot of duplication there. And what we see in the future is really a shift on that platform. You're still going to have the traditional assets that a grid needs to have. You're going to have a lot more sort of soft assets as well that enable the ubiquitous connectivity. I think there's a consolidation of networks, fewer networks. Things which enable robotics to help run and maintain the network, artificial intelligence, edge computing, and greater, more pervasive introduction of sensors. And I would put those across both energy and non-energy applications as well. and the utility can gather this information and bring it together into this neural smart grid, and use not just the information they've got from their sort of traditional assets and operations, but information from other people as other types of equipment as well to optimize the overall operation. Yeah, and then just a sort of few examples of the sort of applications that we're seeing on this energy cloud. And again, we've talked about integrated distributed energy resources, transportation with EVs, both as a demand and a supply of energy onto the grid system in different places, which just from operating the system can be difficult to predict, but also an advantage if you can move certain types of equipment to locations where you need to increase the power in that area of the distribution or transmission system. We're seeing certainly the opportunity for reducing the power and better managing the power, going behind the meter into sort of building and facilities management. We see the gains from there to be pretty significant, actually, in terms of reducing carbon emissions. Internet of Energy, greater number of sensors, more information to support transactive energy, and then integrating smart cities to sort of optimize the load and consumption of energy across the network.
Hey, Nick, this is David. Can I interrupt just a minute?
Yeah, sure.
I don't usually do this. I found that last slide. Could you go back to it? I found it really fascinating. It really bears out some of the lead edge evolution on our power grid right now. And I'm wondering, I'm kind of looking at the spheres around these different topics, and you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is the size of the dots in the connection kind of indicative of what Trilliant's perceiving to be the stage of development or the amount of coverage, or is it just kind of a depiction right now?
Yeah, it really, this is just a depiction just to represent these different types of applications. We're involved, I'm going to say, some of these more than others: smart cities, Internet of Energy, integrating energy sources, on the building side as well, and really around the sort of neural grid. Those are the key areas that we're involved with as a business, and took through some of those examples a little later in the presentation. There's, in terms of carbon reduction, there's I'm going to say there's not a lot of work that's being done that looks at sort of reducing carbon emissions and then coupling that with the smart grid as well, and looking at the impacts of the two together, and how do you deliver those sorts of benefits. But from the studies that have been done, the sort of biggest sources of benefits, kind of interesting, is around what you can do in sort of building and facilities management, optimizing the use and reduction of use and time of use and type of use of energy in those locations. But I think as you're putting out these sensors into the grid, you're collecting that information, and then from there you're going to identify new opportunities to optimize how you're running the overall system.
That's great. Thank you.
So I think, what are sort of the key takeaways from this energy transition that we've talked about? So I think today that the utilities have got the opportunity to architect and implement something that supports their needs. And that includes an opportunity to really work out what they want to have in the ecosystem, the connected devices. And that can include, today the sort of smart grid implementations tend to be more around traditional grid assets, but I think you've got to build on that. What are the other utility assets that give them information that are helpful? What are the other assets within their operating region that again could give them information that helps them optimize the running of the grid and run it in a stable and more resilient way, and at the right cost level as well. I think architecting in a way that sort of contemplates the future needs, particularly from a communication perspective. What's the bandwidth? Being able to define the security levels. I mean, as you're bringing together this energy cloud, you're talking about assets which are owned and operated by lots of different people. And a key challenge for utilities, we hear it today, but I think this challenge mounts of, how do you integrate from a cybersecurity way in a way that protects everyone in the process, that that information is from a trusted source, or at least you recognize where it's not from a trusted source. So I think there's the opportunity here. The key takeaway is for the utilities to get behind this and define the architecture and standards that they want to have in this type of an approach. And I think there's a commercial opportunity. We've certainly seen examples of this in the US where utilities are laying out these networks, generally not around the energy cloud, but perhaps more specific to their sort of core assets. But they're also finding commercial opportunities to share those networks with other people in a way that's that's secure and lower some operating costs and perhaps generate some revenue as well. In other cases, I talked before about allowing them to sort of integrate some of the non-traditional assets into the overall operations. And how do the utilities embrace this transition? We're seeing a trifecta of challenges here. Flat and decreasing demand for energy. There's an increasing cost of maintaining the existing infrastructure to deliver the energy. The example I gave earlier around where I am, that a lot of people are moving to solar panels and reducing how much energy they're drawing off the grid themselves. We're seeing a rapid increase in renewables and distributed energy resources. It makes the grid more difficult to operate, but there's also an opportunity as well if you couple them in and integrate them in the right way. And these are both threats or an opportunity depending on your sort of position in the market. But the key takeaway for us is that they should be building a platform that allows all these pieces of equipment to interact and to be in the connection business to support this energy cloud of connecting all these devices together, not just being in the energy business. Because I think beyond connecting the devices together, there's a role to orchestrate this as well, and to put the customer at the center of everything that the utilities are doing. Very focused on customer experiences. People are expecting that more and more. And to an extent, put the technology in the customer hands as well. Build products and services that are addressing more and more the customer sort of needs as we get into this slightly different world of electric vehicles and having solar panels on the houses and other types of sort of similar applications. And where Trilliant Fit is utilities need to partner with long-term partners who are going to work with them strategically to implement these types of communication platform with the right architecture, the right security to realize these types of applications. So just what does the energy cloud look like? The power supply is going to be predominantly clean and distributed. We're going to see a lot more artificial intelligence, particularly around information from what we're calling the Internet of Things. More automation. I think we see pockets of automation, but there's the opportunity with these sensors to transform the smart grids into much more autonomous and self-healing networks. There's certainly a maturity model to get there, but we see it happening already. The role of a network orchestrator, I think there's a key opportunity for utilities to move into that orchestrating role. If they don't, somebody else will. And I think that could be a disadvantage in the long term. We're going to see energy markets, especially retail, become more competitive without some of the sort of traditional regulated approaches. Certainly, we see blockchain in there as well, enabling retail trading. And I think we're just going to see a transition for energy companies and utilities moving from more bulk asset and supply to sort of these individual sort of service tuned towards customers. So, how does Trilliant fit into this with the energy cloud, with this neural grid? We've got 30 years of experience innovating with utilities and industry, connecting lots of different types of devices in, I'm going to say, operationally critical in environments, and providing operational insights off the data collected from those devices. So on the connectivity side, we've got over 35 million devices connected globally today. We focus around providing private and secure RF networks that are exclusively used by our customers. I think a key feature is those RF networks use regulated spectrum, which means it's available instantly and it's available without cost. We provide a ubiquitous connectivity, and we bring that all under a single architecture. Within these types of communication platform, you've got a range of different types of devices, all which have different needs for speed, for latency, for range, for cost. And we bring that together under a single architecture, which allows you to connect very high speed devices. I'm going to say 270 megabits per second with very low latency that allows you to run things like grid synchronizers. And then moving out to sort of very high volume equipment in the millions, which is more latent tolerant, like, for example, streetlight controls, that type of thing. And the way our network is architectured, you're able to connect all these different types of device onto a single architecture. And we're experiencing connecting a wide range of different applications in sort of high availability operational environments, which are always very secure. And I'm going to give some examples of the sort of customers we work with, but I think that's a big differentiator to be able to support that. On the other part, to sort of enable this energy cloud around software, big data, and analytics. I'm going to say, the software that we provide around Internet of Things and smart grid, is central to, I want to say the largest, but I'm going to say one of the largest IoT platforms in the world, more than 12 million devices on a single system. There are bigger deployments, but not many are on a single system. We've got more than 30 years experience of collecting, processing, storing, and providing secure access to both trusted and untrusted parties to this type of data. And even I was just sort of doing a little bit of maths in preparation for this. We've got customers that collect more than 1 billion pieces of data each day, which is just a huge amount of data. So we've right from the ground up have got software and networks which are architected to support this very high volume of data in a reliable way. We've also got experience as an integrator of systems and integrating our software platform. The sort of model that we see in this energy cloud is you're going to have a core platform with communication that brings the data back. But whilst you might perform some of the analytics and processing, there's going to be a lot of other companies who need to integrate to that platform for niche and sort of mainstream applications. Just to sort of recap on Trilliant, we've got more than 75 customers globally. Generally, those are large and long-term customers, 10, 15-year relationships. We've really put ourselves in a place where we become a strategic partner with our customers, and we're looking at the long term of how we help them evolve the business and meet these sort of operational goals. About 75% of our customers use the Trilliant platform for multiple applications. I think this is a sort of a critical piece, and I'll give some examples. But they're doing distribution automation. It could be smart metering. It could be streetlight control. It could be other sorts of sensors, distribution monitoring, real-time video streaming from security cameras, voice over IP communications. We're enabling utilities to do all of those applications on a single network in a way that preserves the individual needs of each of those applications. We've got about 500 million customers under our networks in total. We're inventors as well. We've got 63 patents, 14 pending at the moment. In the mainstay, our technology is invented, designed, and manufactured by us, which gives us a lot of control over how we innovate. And working with utilities, we look for a constant feedback loop of how we take customer experience and take it back and improve those products. More than a third of our customers use more than one of our communication platforms in their deployment. We're in 25 countries and territories. I talked before around the Americas. The mainstay for us has been the US. That's where the business really originated. And we've developed out from there into Latin America, into Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Chile, the island of Aruba as an example. Really pretty broad, Dominican Republic as well. Really huge range of customers. And I think, one of the things I like about that is we're able to bring a lot of experience of working in, let's say, solving a lot of different problems in different places, working with different regulators, seeing how everyone is solving a problem in a slightly different way. And we try and bring that experience to our other customers. I guess, just a sort of interesting point. As we've developed the business in Latin America more and more, I've been really impressed by the level of innovation that the utilities down there have brought. They get the communication platform, and they really want to find every single way to put another application, really sweat everything they can out of the investment, and lots of sort of innovation of problems that they had that they wanted to solve, and the communication platform lets them connect stuff and do that. And then we've deployed about over 35 million endpoints onto our technology today, and that's out and operating. Just a few examples of some of the customers we work with, and again, just a real spread here, but Hydro One in Canada was probably the first large-scale RF mesh deployment for AMI. That was one of Trilliant's deployments. So we're real pioneers in that respect. The largest purchaser of meters is CFE in Mexico. We have 3 deployments with CFE. We've just done 12 expansions. They're a large purchaser of meters in the Americas. We've done a lot of work with them around AMI, but also providing them a communication platform which is ready for them to put these other types of application on around distribution automation, harvesting more data. Avangrid in Maine, British Gas in the UK, San Diego Gas and Electric. If you ever fly into San Diego Airport, we control the FAA aviation lights on our network. It's used across their territory for things like fire protection as well. If you ever go to the island of Aruba, every streetlight and smart meter on the island of Aruba is connected with our infrastructure, and we've also integrated to a number of other applications to make it a smart island, including things like diesel generation as well. And I think that's a great example of where they've taken our network for one application and they start to build up this, the beginnings of this energy cloud, and they put all these different applications on and pulling information back to optimize how they're running their business. CPM in the Dominican Republic, just as an example, there's about 8 utilities in the Dominican Republic. 3 are government owned. Their losses are probably in the order of something like 30%. CEPM use our technology, our communication technology, very innovative use. Again, they've taken the opportunity of having this ubiquitous communication and they've worked out how to put many applications on that network. Their losses are, just to compare with the competition, their losses are under 5% compared with sort of 30% from some of the others. So just huge benefit there. Tenaga in Malaysia, we've got 8 million endpoints under deployment. Again, they're using our communication platform there across metering, distribution automation, and some of the other applications as well. And then I just wanted to give a couple of examples, some of the other customers that we're working with in the Americas, in Chile, Peru, and Ecuador. And we're really at the entry point in some of these markets as they're defining the regulation, and we've been putting our communication platform in there to enable not just smart metering, but just a smarter approach to how they're implementing smart grid and beginnings of the energy cloud. And then these are just some customer examples, and Tico with Amira, they deployed our communication platform. They used primarily for distribution automation. But again, they've said, as they've had this network there, they said, okay, what else can we put on this? What are the other sort of business benefits? How can we use a sort of ubiquitous communication to put other applications on? And they've moved that out from things like volt-var control, outage management, more fault detection, CCTV for substation monitoring as well. Avangrid in Maine, really very broad application here, huge carbon emission reductions, a lot of it driven, very tough territory to get across. But by putting our network in, they're able to put better volt-var control in there. They were able to reduce travel, better restoration times, real sort of transformation, and continue to put applications on the network. It won a number of awards at the time. Another example, Prepper in Puerto Rico. We actually have coverage across the whole island for Puerto Rico, and they've got just a variety of applications, all of which are helping them to run a more stable grid, helping them to reduce technical and non-technical losses. But we've got applications like fault circuit indicators, street lights, some smart metering, but that's not the mainstay, and transformer monitoring as well. And this has been a theme in a country with a sort of pretty fragmented network and a lot of problems. We've been able to lay a network across there and put a series of different applications which give them critical information that help them optimize how they're running the network. I talked a little bit about Aruba, but fault circuit indicators, streetlight control, electric meters, and then they put pressure sensors in, so they're able to monitor things around the diesel generation on the island as well. And they've also integrated into sort of a number of different applications. But there's just a great example where they've had a very sort of engineering-led approach within the utility. They've taken these communication network. What else can we put on here? What other value can we get? How can we get information to improve how we're running our business? And they're just moving into a lot more around electric vehicles now. CFE I talked about, but we partnered with Siemens there to deploy our technology, but reducing energy losses, revenue protection from this additional information, the ability to remote control assets. And frankly, in the case of some of the locations where they've deployed this technology, it's not just a financial or operational benefit. There's some safety issues there as well. There are locations that if they wanted to go in and do what I would call switching work on the network, there was a federal police officer, a local police officer, and 2 guys from the army who would go with the guys from the utility. This is just a level of remote control and automation, which means they don't have to do that anymore. So it's beyond the commercial. It's enables them to run the network in a much more efficient and real-time way. So I'll just summarize up. I think I said 40 minutes, and I think we're about there right now. But yeah, let me summarize. Yeah, we're seeing a global trend with energy and utilities to deliver on called them the 3Ds: decarbonization, distributed sources of energy, and the digitalization of the network. And that means clean, distributed, and mobile infrastructure that's going to be more intelligent. We see the traditional role of a utility. We think it's going to change, less centralization. We think there's a critical and competitive role for the utilities to orchestrate that smart energy cloud. Some of the research we've seen is just in itself having a smarter grid and built on this energy cloud model and orchestrating it efficiently can deliver 10 to 15% reduction in carbon emissions in itself. We see technology is going to play a critical role in enabling the energy cloud and the neural grid, ubiquitous connectivity for assets, and intelligent processing and making actions, automated actions, taken on that data. We see ourselves as sort of inherently positioned to facilitate the communications and enable the data, the data piece, the data collation, the software intelligence, and the data exchange as well. We don't think we're the only party in that space. It's a collection of companies, but we certainly see ourselves as being able to be the hub to provide that information and provide some of the artificial intelligence and machine learning expertise around that. So look, this is my last slide, and what next? So Trilliant have been in the Carolinas, North Carolina, for about 4 years now. We've got about 25 customers in the US, and they're dotted all around the country: Kentucky, Illinois, Texas, all around the country. And we're looking right now for energy companies and utilities, who are members of E4 that we can look to innovate with. We want to be able to demonstrate these sort of building blocks and deliver some customer-specific examples with real-world commercial and operational benefits. And so, if you're from a city, a municipal utility, a cooperative, IOU, or we've got partners or products in the sort of area that we've talked around today, we'd love to talk more and understand what we could put together and work out with you. So please, if you fit into that category, we'd love to talk. Please reach out and perhaps we can talk more.
So thank you. Let me ask all of those that are with us this afternoon, if you have questions for Nick, if you will put them in the chat function, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and we'll pick up on those. But I've been making notes as we go along. I got about 7 or 8 questions I'm going to pose myself, just out of my curiosity, and perhaps these are questions that others online will find interesting. But like I said, anyone else online, if you got a question, put it in chat and I'll work it in. So Nick, your closing point there, I think is really a good one. And as I listened to the presentation, what I heard was that Trilliant provides service in 25 different countries, and your service is to utilities, primarily electric utilities. So, and I heard you mention Puerto Rico. So for instance, as you're working in Puerto Rico, I know that its grid has literally been devastated through natural disaster, and your team is part of the team that is restoring, rebuilding, and renovating that grid. So as you look out to countries like Puerto Rico or other countries throughout the world, do you see instances where you observe a practice or an approach or a solution, and you look back to the United States and say, wow, now that's something we're not doing in the United States, and that's something that I can bring to utilities. So do you see situations like that? And are there any examples you can point to say, now here's something that's really innovative or thoughtful that's being done elsewhere that we really need to think about the United States?
I think I'd probably pick up on a couple of areas, and obviously the US has got a lot of utility companies, so there's just a complete range of different approaches and attitudes there. But a couple of things which I think are sort of fair representation. So a lot of the projects that we're seeing, particularly in Latin America and Caribbean, they tend to be there's the opportunity there to replace more than the just the communication, more infrastructure. So it's perhaps not so much of updating existing infrastructure. They're able to put new infrastructure in there, but nonetheless, the point I'd make is they are architecting their approach, a smart grid. And perhaps in some ways this is led by the work we're doing with the government and the regulators there, but they're architecting it with the energy cloud in mind from the outset. They are looking to put an underlying communication platform in that can do all these things in the future. And then what we're building with them is a maturity model to get there in a number of steps. So they're really thinking about the underlying communication platform, and I'm going to say the cybersecurity as well that's needed to support that. And I think the second observation I'd have, which again we're seeing a lot more in Latin America, is just there is a willingness to innovate there. Very engineering-led approach to innovate and try new things. How can they sort of purchase the assets or purchase the solution based on an initial business case, but then they're constantly working out how they can just get another thing on it to make their life easier, and reduce the costs, make the network easier to run.
So that, those descriptions have kind of prompted part B of my curiosity on this point. So, Nick, I'm curious as to whether you've observed differences in the approach to grid development or energy asset investment, where in various countries they're not driven or regulated by cost of service, like most of the large investor-owned utilities in the United States, where they've got the prudence measure. It's got to be used and useful. And do you find instances in other countries where they're not tied to that, and they can be a little more imaginative in their investment?
Yeah. Sorry, David, were you asking for some examples of that?
I'm just curious as to whether you see any differences between regulation in these other countries, United States, and whether it makes a difference in how they spend capital.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say sort of the experience we've had is, I'm just going to pick 4 countries, but Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Colombia. There are 4 very different attitudes and approaches by the regulator there on how they're approaching this sort of capital investment and how they're doing the analysis behind what should be an allowable investment, and then how they get a return on it. And a lot of the work we've been trying to do is to influence the way that they're thinking. And I'm going to try and give a good example here, and perhaps a bad one. We're pretty active in Chile, and the way that the Chilean regulator is working today is actually they started off with looking at smart metering, but actually what they've ended up doing, or will end up doing, is deploying a network first that will cover the whole territory rather than focusing on just smart metering. And that will allow them to put all these other types of application on in parallel. I'm going to try and contrast that with another one, which we're not where we want to be, but is perhaps Peru, where they are only focused on the cost of doing something like smart metering, and not what I think is the bigger long-term picture around this energy cloud and smarter grid. So there's a couple that are in contrast. And what we try and do is we try and get in and sort of share the global experience that we've got in over 25 countries of how other utilities other governments have done it, how other utilities have done it, and try and bring those learnings back to. There's advantages and disadvantages, but what we're increasingly seeing more and more now is the importance to get the intent right from the start. Like, what are we really trying to do here? And look at the longer term, bigger picture and benefits that smart grid and this energy cloud will bring.
Nick, you mentioned earlier in your presentation, you made, it was just a phrase, I wrote it down because I really liked it. It said utilities are thinking about how to bring more intelligence to their assets. And I'm wondering, do you have an example of bringing more intelligence to assets that I can envision a scenario. For example, historically we had central power generation, transmission, distribution, consumption, principally controlled by the utility. And now we've got all of these devices, we've got distributed energy resources, but at the same time, we're highly dependent upon the grid, transmission, and central power generation to make sure that, we have continuity of service, we've got power quality that's right, frequency that's right, things like that. So are you seeing, is that where the utilities are working to bring more intelligence to assets to coordinate all that? Or is there another example?
Yeah, no, I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head there. Definitely, what we're seeing, in some cases utilities want to do, but we're actually really seeing the benefits of doing it as well, is to get the right sensors out into the network to collect the information about what the grid system is doing, and then by getting that information, making better decisions around where they're putting, could be mobile sources of energy, could be where they're asking to bring more solar in, or it's more difficult when you've got sort of intermittent sources of energy. That's probably a good example. Where you're dealing with intermittent sources of energy, having that level of intelligence around what they're doing and when they're doing it is sort of critical to running the grid in a stable and resilient way.
So also in your presentation, Nick, I heard, bring your own device. And so help me understand this, because, okay, so bring your own device, but this is the time where cybersecurity threats are increasing. We're discovering that there's backdoors in any number of these devices, even through something simple. It's just a little piece of software code. Yeah. So consumers want to bring their own devices. Utilities are bringing, but how do you take care of all this? How do you make sure that it works? Number one, and number two, that it's secure and doesn't cause you to blow up or malfunction.
I think first and foremost, the way that I'm going to say architect our products, but also the way that we architect the solutions as well, the way that we work with the customers. We're trying to understand from the outset, what's the security model that's appropriate for each of these customers? What do we trust? How much do we trust it? What don't we trust? And then recognize those different types of information and treat them accordingly. And it, for me, particularly doing some of the international side, working with some of the government security organizations, it's been a real eye opener for me on the way that different countries think about it, the way that they, the diligence that they put around it. I think for us, what it comes down to is how do you get it right? Put it in the right. Being clear on what you're trying to do, having the right architecture in there from the start is important. The way that we work from a security perspective is there are multiple layers on across our security to make sure if something doesn't get caught, it gets caught at the next level. And then being clear on what data is, which data you trust, and how much you trust it. I think those are the sort of the three key pieces.
So, Nick, I have at least three more questions, but let me pause a minute. If anyone's online and you're uncomfortable using chat, if you just want to unmute and pose a question to Nick at this moment, I'm going to pause a minute, let you unmute, ask your question if you want to do that. Anybody out there? Going once.
Yeah, hey David, this is Sean.
There you go, Sean, go ahead. Tell everybody who you are first.
Yeah, Sean Fuller, Structural Integrity. So with the network and the sophistication of the network, obviously the amount of information flowing is the platform or Trilliant's platform also a good use case for, let's say, any AI and machine learning that maybe a utility is trying to experience? How would you characterize that based on the amount of data and quality of data? Is there a correlation there?
David, I don't know if you, some of that broke up. I don't know if you caught all of it.
Yeah, so Sean, run the last part through again. Yeah, you broke up.
So with all of the information and communication devices, it's obviously rich for data, streaming data. So the platform, in essence, it seems to me, would be good for any kind of AI or machine learning that may want to be utilized, or if clients saw a benefit in application of AI or machine learning. Is the data quality ever a factor? And do people think about the Trilliant platform or communication platform as also enabling other technologies like that?
Okay, so thanks, Sean, and good question. So I'm going to say, I mean, you're right. There is a huge amount of streaming or real-time data that's being produced. I've got one customer, just I can think of just an individual customer, and they're collecting more than a billion pieces of data each day. And so you can just imagine the volumes are huge. Is data quality an issue? I think what we typically see in deployments as time goes on, you're able to improve the data quality, or at least you're able to weed out the anomalies. Certainly, applications like machine learning and artificial intelligence, you can certainly use those types of principles to clean that data for you. And I think very often, if you're looking at collecting data from a large number of sensors, you're able to filter out the anomalies to look more at the trend than the individual data points. But I mean, the platform itself is a huge enabler for things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think what you've got to focus on is to try and not boil the ocean. Work out what are the things that are important to you, and build a maturity model where you work through individual applications, you get the business information or the business benefit you want, and then just keep on building on that. There's a lot of things which are common between utilities, but there's also a lot of utilities which are trying to solve their own individual problems as well. And I think that's where that sort of maturity model of building on it really becomes that valuable.
Yeah, that was my question. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Sean.
Nick, I've got a chat question for you, and it deals with the just the vast network you have, all the devices connected to it. Do you find that you wind up with contention or interference from other devices that the utilities are using? And if so, how do you moderate that or eliminate that so it doesn't interfere with your operation and your data?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, we certainly don't see those types of problem. Just a great example I give. We deployed our technology in Mexico City, and if you're looking for an environment where you could find interference and contention from other pieces of equipment, whether they're owned by the utility or they're owned by somewhere else. I'm going to say downtown Mexico City is a great place to learn from that, because there's just every sort of RF interference, intentional, not intentional, that you could imagine. Very high density, lots of different things, some of which have been agreed to be put there, and some of which have not. But what we've done over, I talked before about sort of innovating over 30 years. What we've done over a long period of time is we've tuned the way that our radio equipment works to deal with exactly these types of interference and contention. And it's very rarely a problem for us. And I'm going to say, as an example, Mexico City, we don't have that problem. And I think that's a great example. And, there's just from a communications platform perspective, there's different ways that you can deal with that type of interference. And I think we've got a good architecture that makes sure that we can that we're effective in managing that interference. So we haven't seen those problems. It's a good question, and happy to sort of dig into the engineering and technology side with whoever raised that question and give some examples. There's a lot of stories about when people have deployed these types of RF network, and the one I like is there was a customer where we were deploying, and they said that when we deployed our network, they said it was interfering with their dog's training collar, and like the dog kept on getting an electric shock. I mean, there was just no way. But there's a whole bunch of stories out there that something's changed, and therefore this problem in my life is now a consequence of interference with the network. We've done a lot of work with when we go into new countries, but we've done it in the US as well. There's a lot of work done to make sure we don't have those problems up front. Plus, which the sort of spectrum we operate in, we got some pretty clever technology and algorithms, which means we just don't see those problems.
So Nick, we're headed to wrap up at 4:30, and I'm sharing that just for everyone else's information if you're planning the rest of your afternoon. I've got a couple more questions. If anybody else has a question out there, just raise your hand or unmute and join in here with me. But Nick, I heard earlier in the presentation, a single system with, was it 12 million Internet of Things devices? Okay, all right, that's what I thought. All right, so I assume that all these devices are not just the same device. So when you said 12 million at a single system, I immediately went, wow, is there some kind of standardization or control where you only specify certain types of devices to be connected and they have to have a certain protocol? Or do you take care of that with software on your side? How does that work?
Yeah, we I mean, the range of that we connect to our system, I mean, it blows my mind sometimes, just the total range of sort of devices. And from a utility sort of equipment, and whether it's electric, water, or gas, there's some equipment which has its own proprietary sort of integrations and protocols, and we have to build into those and integrate to those. But there's also a lot of open standard work being done now, where we're just able to integrate straight into it just through what I would call is just a standard IP network. And that's one of the clever things about our architecture. It allows us to pull in what I'm going to call sort of standard IP type communication, and we're also able to integrate in some customized protocols and communication technologies as well. And these devices work in very different ways, and try and give a spectrum. But if you take something like a SCADA system or distribution automation, you're talking about you're looking for something which is high speed and low latency, and highly sort of fault tolerant. You want it to be real time data. And then you might look at other devices like, I'm just call it a smart meter, which you've got more tolerance on the latency of that type of piece of equipment, because you don't need it in fractions of a second, a few seconds is fine. And then you sort of push to the other end of the scale where you're looking at battery-powered devices, which is typical for a gas meter or a water meter. And so the battery devices are integrated to the network in a way that maximizes the battery life. You're trying to do very clever things about how often it connects, what sort of data it sends, how it compresses that data to maximize sort of the life of that battery, that battery sensor. You were just on the sort of the range of devices. We did some work. We're doing some work with the Gas Technology Institute at the moment on pipeline sensors. It was sort of confidential. They've done a press release on it. If they haven't, no one talk about it. But we've got one of the challenges when you put gas pipelines into the ground is how do you monitor them? How do you know if someone that they shouldn't? You're talking about a huge expanse of assets. So we've put these sensors on these gas line which are connected with our technology. We measure, I think it's 16 parameters on that pipeline around. Is someone encroaching on the pipeline? Is something happening to the asset? Oxidization, vibration, expansion, all of these different measures. Being able to pull this sort of data back is critical to understanding the health and also the risks of the assets.
Well, having started my career in the natural gas industry in 1980, Nick, I can tell you that what you just described is like magic, because 40 years ago, a person would have to go out and visually do all that stuff. I'm going to give folks fair warning. I've got one or two more questions. I'm going to pause after this next one, but and I'm going back. You remember I interrupted when you were at a particular slide and it showed evolving technologies that communications is supporting, and you had DER and vehicle to grid and transactive energy and things like that on there. Yeah. Oh, you're going back to it. Thank you. Okay. So looking at this slide, when I look at a lot of these emerging application areas, I look at these and I say, I'm guessing that there's not a critical mass of activity here that really supports the capital investment necessary to really bring them to fruition. So I'm curious as to whether you're seeing utilities that are actually they're making the investment, they're investing ahead, kind of nurturing the development of this emerging area. Are you seeing any of that? Or are you seeing that the utilities are typically being followers, with the critical mass having to be there before they invest?
Good question. I think the model we're trying to develop here, and I think it is the lowest cost model, is that you should be thinking about, and this is an example of 7 things, and there I could probably think of another 17 items to put on this on this map in terms of different applications and things that can be in this energy cloud. I think the role we're talking about here is to design this from the outset to have a single communication network which connects all these items, which will always be cheaper than trying to connect or implement multiple networks to connect these different sources. So almost from the outset, the economy or the efficiency we're talking about is that you should put all of these applications onto a single platform, versus what we see in other utilities. And I've got one customer, I think they've got 12 different networks as they're picking up all these different applications, and that's 12 based on different geographies, because one has mountains and one's flat, so they decided they needed 2 different networks. And then they had equipment from 2 different vendors, and I'm making the names up, but one was ABB and one was Schneider. So then that was 4 networks to cover that area. And what we say, okay, this is not the right way of implementing this. You've got to maintain multiple sets of communication network. You've got to have multiple controls over the security. You're not just dealing with one set of cybersecurity, you're dealing with each one for the different networks. So I think just to sort of come back, I think you've got to look at the longer term picture in justifying that in investment. But in itself, the approach of having a single platform will be the lowest cost approach to doing this, both from a capital investment but an ongoing operation as well.
So to summarize what you just said, what you're explaining is the development of a single lead edge network that supports existing assets. So, so there it's used, useful, cost justified, et cetera. The existence of that network actually fosters the evolution of all these other stuff, because that existing network, if it's done right, can allow these other things just to incrementally step onto it.
Exactly. And that's what we see time and time again, that the network goes in, and then 6 months later, it's like, okay, well, could we just add this other item on? Can we just get the information from this? And that's exactly what we want them to do. And each time they're adding it, they're getting another piece of value from the investment. Then you can sort of perhaps look at some other, utilities can look at other models beyond having this exclusive network only for their use, for only their assets, about how could they connect other people's assets. And I'm just going to give an example, but let's say it's street lights in a city. There's an advantage to the city because they could have these remote controlled street lights that they can monitor. They can know which ones are faulty. They could choose to switch them on, off, or dim them. They've got those facilities. But from a utility perspective, they're able to get all this information around how much power is being consumed, when it's being consumed. So I think beyond just the core utility assets, the ability to have this network that they can connect other people's assets on and collect useful information from that helps them derive benefits around, what's consuming energy on their grid, how it's being consumed, and can they control it in a way that helps them optimize the end-to-end running of the system.
Nick, may I add something to that as well?
Sure.
Yeah. Explain who you are.
This is Andy Schechter, also with Trilliant. So full transparency on that. I think another thing to add to that, thinking of utilities who have deployed multiple networks, is it's not a either or per se to begin with, and from the perspective of doing some surgical implementations of networks, that's a flexibility that I think is a really strong value proposition for Trilliant, because you're not having to rip and replace things, but you're able to augment and add to, just like what Nick was saying and what you were asking about, David, adding to, maybe sensors that don't exist today, but that will in the future. There's, a great way to not have to eat the elephant in one bite in that regard. And I think, that's a really critical thing to think about as well.
We talked before about sort of what are the issues that when we've talked to utilities, it's like, how do they justify a capital investment? If every time they want to do something on the grid, they have to go through a process of justifying another capital investment, it makes it pretty difficult to run a project like that. And I think this is a different sort of model where they have justified the network up front. And so each one of these initiatives or projects to make that grid smarter is doesn't need that incremental investment to the communication network each time. So it's a much easier way for them to sort of manage the deployment and that maturity model towards the smart grid and the energy cloud.
So Nick and Andy, I think this is an excellent point with which to close us out. Let me just ask, do either of you have any concluding comment with regard to all that we've covered this afternoon? Anything else to wrap us up?
No, look, David, just thanks to everyone for joining and for listening to the presentation. And again, if we've been in North Carolina for I think 4 years now, and certainly if there are people on the presentation who are listening in utilities, energy space, gas, water, electricity, or people who've got solutions which are complementary to what we do. So certainly within E4, we'd love to talk more with those people,
Right.
explore the relationships and opportunities.
I do see some utility technology managers online with us, and I'm sure they'll be in touch with you directly, Nick. So well done. We thank Trilliant. We've been wanting to get Trilliant on for a long time, and Nick and Andy and Julie, thanks so much for accommodating this and producing really a really extensive and insightful presentation. We also thank Bradley for being our sponsor and providing the resources by which we can produce the program. I will ask Nick in correspondence tomorrow morning to see if he is willing to share this deck. And what we'll do is, if Nick is willing to share his deck, we'll turn it into a PDF and we'll distribute it. Also, Jess has been recording, and we will process this recording. We'll have Nick take a look at it. If he gives us a thumbs up, we'll distribute the recording for everyone's benefit also, everyone who's registered. So we thank everyone, and I will encourage you to head for E4 Carolina's events page. We have another technology session coming up next Wednesday. Yep, Wednesday, 1 p.m. We're going to take a look at how digital technologies can reduce carbon consumption in the power markets. Got some great speakers there too. So Itron, ABB, EPRI. Oh, I know I'm missing one that I'm going to be embarrassed about, but those are the ones we have lined up. So check the events page and come see us next week. Andy, Nick, thanks so much for being with us.